to the third day of this webinar on the Aqua Team. So welcome to those who have joined today, and those who've joined already from Monday. Today we have two lectures. The first one is by Luca Lucentini. He's from the Istituto Superiore di Sanità in Italy. That's the Italian Institute for National Health. And he will present about the water and sanitation and health, a subject that was already discussed in the first day. And I take just 1 second to repeat that we have put the recording and the presentations of the previous sessions for the past 2 days are online, so you can see them. Luca, to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to be sure that you can see the screen and the slides.
Yes, we do.
Oh, thank you so much. So I can start, and it's really a pleasure for me to have this, to try to share with you a contribution about the EU law framework about water and health legislation. WASH is water and sanitation and health, and hygiene and health may be used for H, and there are obviously strong relationships. My presentation is quite flexible because I put it in lots of slides that I want to leave you, and even if I try to present an overview of the wide issue, which focus on Europe and on Italy, but you can imagine that the vision is obviously enlarged to all the planet. So what we have to consider at the beginning is that water and sanitation are considered maybe the first measure that saved life and is saving life in the history in the human history. When in this statistics, it was made a question to readers of medical journal, British medical journal, that essentially were physicians, and they were asked to what they considered as the sanitary revolution. And as you can see, piped water and sewers were before antibiotics, anesthesia and vaccines, and also before the DNA structure. And obviously the history of the knowledge about the epidemiology is just know, but we have not time to go into details. So the evolution of this concept is clearly that SDG 6 is in the center of many actions, and health is the more obvious connection, but many other are strongly related, such as no poverty, zero hunger, use of land, and so on. But what we mean with SDG 6, essentially we should consider that to have access to water and sanitation means to have safely managed water systems, which means provide safe and clean water, access to water in the needed quantity, access to water where needed, and access to water when needed. This is the same for sanitation, because water and sanitation are two goals of the same, two faces of the same goal. Okay, in the nutshell, water is essential for EU citizenship and economy. is a serious risk of climate change and environmental changes. As you know, water is the most fragile elements of climate change, and we will go back into this issue at the end of the presentation. And in facing this, we have an extensive, long history and dynamic water legislation. Essentially, we should consider that the question of water is, and the global water cycle is strongly interfered by human interferences, which means land conversion and land uses, climate change, but also water uses. These drivers are affecting many water aspects, causing a global water crisis. From the social point of view, from the ecosystemic point of view, from the hydrology more generally point of view. In facing these problems, but before this problem appeared in the whole burden, the EU water policy established an extensive framework of legislation. We should consider that the attention, the concern on water was one of the first concern of the European population, together with atomic energy and the use of energies. When European Union was founded, the water issue was put into the attention by European citizenship. And so this resulted in many pieces of EU water legislation starting to be created in the the second half of 19 years. So European water legislation has taken a leading and innovative role in the design of national water policy in many EU member states, but also in other close member states, but also in other countries. We can found three eras, three stages of water legislation. In the first area, the problems were approached on a problem by problem basis. So we had directive and decisions concerning specific types of water: surface water, fish water, shellfish water, bathing waters, and drinking water directives. And then also another in the same era, some other concepts were taken into account, such as the problem of nitrates, the urban wastewater, and so on. In 2000, this legislation appeared to be complex, sometimes not well coordinated, and at the end, the effectiveness of the legislation was not adequate. In view of this, in 2000 was created the main pillar of the new legislation. Everything was revised, and the new, more coordinated EU water legislation was created around the Water Framework Directive that you know as 2060 EC. In this new view, in this third era of water legislation, the action is accelerated towards tackle water pollution and prevent water pollution, but also was pushed the concept of enhancing EU preparedness to water-related climate change impacts, and also the polluter pay principles. Okay, we have also to consider a very wide marketing and gross value associated with water, and we are talking just about the direct market of water, but we should think that everything is moved, mainly not everything, but the most part of the sector, such as agriculture, food production, is moved by water sector. So if we want to consider in a picture the concept, the vision, the drivers of water legislation, this is my personal view. In this slide, I put a personal view of the main pieces of water legislation, because we can in this a water lex could be more pushed on health, on economy, on environment, and it is quite subjective, this view. I consider drinking water directive more oriented on health, but we can also consider it or bathing water more oriented to economy, if we think the market of tourism as an example. But if we can discuss about the drivers of the legislation, we agree that water framework directive is in the center of this triangle, because the water framework directive can generate a circle of win-to-win policy related to water. The Water Framework Directive really abrogated and replaced most of former directives on aquatic environment, and also many other directives related to discharges in aquatic environments. Anyway, the Water Framework Directive is considered not sufficient to protect marine waters, and so it was adopted also a directive specifically conceived to protect and to prevent risks related to seawater and to marine water, and this package is called Marine Strategy Framework Directive. In addition, some other important pieces of legislation remain in force with the Water Framework Directive. Essentially, the water on the drinking water now is 2020-21/84, and the bathing water directive. Also, the latter is under revision now. It is important also to consider that other two pillars of water legislation in terms of contribution to the protection of human health and environment, but also on judicial activities, sanctions, and polluter pay principle are yet in place. Specifically the directive on wastewater treatment and the directive on nitrate pollution. The first one, wastewater treatment directive, urban wastewater treatment directive, is now under revision, and the process is really essential to the future of safe environment and health of our European region. Because if we can assure protection by sewage, we directly can protect health, because lots of emerging contaminants, of concerning contaminants we don't want in drinking water are due to human activities. So as an example, pharmaceutics, we are we are concerned about pharmaceuticals, but we are also the drivers of pharmaceuticals into the drinking water because of inadequate disposal of these contaminants. So the concept of environmental health is particularly sensitive for WASH because the safeguard of environment is directly related to the protection of health. Going to some more national or national experience, I would like to share with you. We conceived the problem of water, the water and health connections under a more extended, more wide umbrella of public health and climate change adaptation policies in the European Union. So we consider in a important project of the last years the protection about many environmental health drivers and particularly on water. We consider that Italy is really a living lab on climate and environmental changes due to its position, and its geographic and also hydrological characteristics. So our country is one of the most affected from natural disasters related to climate change, but also on long-term trends of climate changes. So we also in the terms of the water, we are going as the planet, but maybe more than more fastly that the other regions to drivers of climate change, essentially drought and heat waves and floods. And in this analysis was done by producing an effective documents that I suggest for many countries to work on. That is the climate and health country profile that is promoted by WHO, but also by the UNCCC Convention of the Climate Change. This document is really a good strategic way to work together with many sectors to analyze and study the adaptation measures on climate change. In case of Italy, the problem of water was obviously analyzed, and some solutions were proposed, such as promote natural water conservations, invest in the resiliency of water systems, aggregate the fragmentized surveillance, promote water use efficiencies, strengthen capacity building related to climate adaptation in water systems, and other measures. This approach is conceived according to the new vision of WHO that put all the sector together on approaching in prevention the problems that can impact health. So the so-called transformation approach use water as a driver, as a a sector with advocacy just to work in parallel or together in strong cooperation and partnership or in alliance with other sectors. And some important results were obtained in the front of reuse of water and in safe drinking water production. This is obviously well endorsed into the WHO guidelines, and in specifically the new approach promote a more a strengthening in prevention together with the end product testing, the traditional or conventional sampling and analysis of water at the tap that can certainly detect some problem but can't effectively protect and prevent from impact of the problem on human health. So the focus is with this approach, the risk analysis and the water safety plan approach is moved on quality and control of processes. And as we already saw in a previous presentation, the concept of water safety plan is a piece of thought that try to identify and solve the problems related to risk priorities. So at the end, the water safety plan doesn't change health-based targets and independent surveillance. These two pillars, health-based targets, the parametric values, and the independent surveillance, the verification of the quality of water at the tap, remain the same. But the way to match to have the compliance of health-based targets into the taps are strongly supported by a risk management plan, a continuous monitoring, and documentation and supporting programs. Why we change the digital approach? The same, and why the research is more and more close to legislation. Because if we try to follow, to cope with emerging problems only by research of contaminants at the tap in the water, we are always behind the problem. We can't anticipate problem, we can't prevent impact on health. As an example, we can see that the research is certainly very effective in approaching environmental and health problems. Traditionally, the industrial or human development is associated with some, especially in the past, impact on environment, and later or very late, these problems cause problems on health. So development, industrial development, environmental impact, at the end health impact. And when we see the human health impact, such as in case of microplastic, POPs, endocrine disruptors, we should we can just act in a retrospective way. We can try to understand the effect of exposure of contaminants on human health, but the correction measures are really in late in compare with initial exposure. As an example, the famous perfluoroalkylic compounds, PFAS, are ubiquitous contaminants because we use these compounds for more or less all the human activities. But as you see, it's very difficult to control and to prevent this kind of exposure. As a result, we have human exposure for many sources, occupational or environmental or environmental exposure. But the water is one of the main way of exposure. In the Australian guidelines, we can see how much the cycle of these compounds is always determining human exposure by a circle and a never-end dissemination of the contaminants. In the very pragmatic approach and communication of our American friends, it's clear that these compounds are ubiquitous contaminants, and we are exposed and impacted from the contaminants. They clearly say that FAS are forever chemicals. When we detect FAS, you found FAS, as in case of 43 states investigated. So the conclusion is be quiet, be calm. You are certainly contaminated. You have certainly FAS in your blood. The same discussion we can do for microplastics. Also microplastics, as you can imagine, consist of a very wide class of compounds, but the use is universal for many fields of application. The environmental fate is that microplastic or plastic and microplastic are transported through water and air. They can accumulate in the sea and sediments, and possibly they interact with animals and humans, and the persistence obviously more or less forever. So if we see the so-called emerging pollutants as an example of FAS or microplastic, we can follow this and we follow these compounds by research. You can see at the up of this slide the number of papers that are oriented on investigating human health impact of microplastic and FAS. But if we want to analyze the problem from a general point of view, we can say that the classification of these contaminants as emerging is quite ridiculous, because it was quite obvious that these contaminants are present in water and many other environments, because they were created and synthesized to be forever chemicals, to have high persistence and multifunctionality. They was pushed on the market as a maximum extension, but the only problem was that we didn't conceive the adequate disposal criteria. So now the result is that we have ubiquitous diffusion, and it's now complex to assess the impact on environment and health. This history is reflected into the development of the new drinking water directive. You can see that from the very old directive considered drafted on in 1980, where 12 member states were present. We passed in 1998, where 14 member states were present, to the double of states in the last directive. So this is to have more states is really a gain in the approach, because the visions, the perspectives, but also the measures provided are derived from many contributions and many cultures, and at the end the harmonization of this approach is maybe the more effective we can conceive it by alone as a single states. Basically, the pillars of this policy is that drinking water quality should be controlled through standards, but so the effective monitoring should be improved, and information of consumers and results of health policies should be assured. The last directive was, however, characterized by a long negotiation, and I can say that it was really a very nice and a chance for scientific growing without doubts, because the approach that were in place were from one side the formal approach of the governments that are based on evidence, health based on evidence and data. And as in the case of microplastic, these data are really lacking, because we have no harmonized methodologies, we have no harmonized standards on classification of microplastic, and we have really no idea, or very, very scarce ideas on the possible health effects. So we, as member states, the official view was to put out microplastic from the directives, because we have no evidence on and methods to control these risks. On the other hand, the Parliament pushed to put on microplastic into the directive, because all the populations is concerned about this. At the end, the compromise was to put microplastic into a so-called watch list that is brand new in the directive, because and this watch list can detect these compounds and collect data in view of regulate these contaminants. Going into details on the new drinking water directive, the directive was adopted in 2020, and the entering in force is really recent, January of this year. The directive is updating the health standards by adding also the watch list mechanism, and introduced an extensive risk-based approach covering the whole water supply chain, introduced the concept of access to water that is recognized as a human right in 2010, and is obliging the member state to improve or maintain access to safe drinking water for all. The measures in drinking water are also addressed to assure more transparency for consumers on water suppliers' efficiency and effectiveness, and measures for the improvement. We are talking about leakage, investments, and water quality parameters that should be provided easily to each consumer. And also the directive improve the framework on substances and material in contact with drinking water. So there is an updating of the drinking water parameters, and let me just spend some words about the essential new risk approach. The risk approach is specifically treated by Article 7, 8, 9, and 10. And the Article 7 is the umbrella and describe the principle of risk assessment and management, while the other articles assess and analyze and manage the risks, which means hazardous events and hazards and control measures in different segments. The first one is the area of abstraction of drinking water. The second piece is the water supply chain under the control of water suppliers. And the last kilometer is the domestic distribution risk assessment, especially for priority premises. If this is the picture, no? Article 7, risk-based approach to water safety, and the other articles, we should consider that the real umbrella of the drinking water is the EU legislation in the more extended vision, especially the EU chemical strategy for sustainability. As in the case of FAS that we mentioned before, or in plastic, the vision of Europe is to remove as much as possible these contaminants from the production and obviously disposal sources in order to prevent any contamination. But for now, there is a dynamic framework to take these compounds under control. Okay, some details are given in these slides. The number of parameters that were calculated. And let me just spend some words about the new watch list. The Commission is called to adopt implementing act to establish and update a watch list. In the watch list are included substances that are likely to be present in water and that could pose a potential risk. We don't know exactly how much, if and how much is this health, but we want to start to approach and to gain knowledge about this. We are talking about pharmaceuticals, endocrine disruptors, and microplastic. The first list was already established, and to potential endocrine disrupting compounds are included, beta estradiol and nonylphenol, and the other updating of this watch list is expected in 2024 with the methods for measuring microplastic. why this watch list was created, we already discussed about this. It was recommended also by scientific research of WHO in order to improve the knowledge and gain a really early surveillance on potential risk factor. The approach is based on guidance value for each substance or compounds when there are data that can contribute to define this limit. Yeah, a special slide on microplastic is also presented, but I don't know if it's the case to spend detail about this because we have not enough time. Anyway, I leave this slide and other slides, and if you are interested in the question and answer session, I would glad to approach this problem. Now some specific transposing act of drinking water directive. In our country, we decided to dedicate a specific national center for water security and safety that is called Scientia, and this new center have the main role of approval WSPs, so approval of water safety plans developed by water suppliers. But also this center have the management of the decentralized information system, dynamic territorial registry of drinking water, and also have training and communication functions. Specific activities, procedures, and the quality system is dedicated to the approval of WSP with the national group of experts for the verification, evaluation, and approval of water safety plans in Italy. Another task is to manage the registry of drinking water, and in doing this there is a strong interaction with the environmental registry of quality of water in the natural states as a natural resource. So we are in a stronger relationship with the environmental authority to acquire and share their data on pressures and monitoring on water that is then used to produce drinking water. These information are used by drinking water supply and health authority to carry out a preventive analysis of risks before catching this water. And obviously there are a brand new guideline on the implementation of water safety plan that are obviously reflected in the auditing guideline on water safety plan. Not time to go into details about this volume of guideline. We have a training course that is arranged in 5 days for team leader of water safety plans, and we are foreseeing a 4 days training course for inspectors, auditors of the approval systems. Essentially, the process is that water supplier ask and provide the information about the water safety plan and the startup of this process, and at the end the water supplier ask for the approval. After then the team leader produce the water safety plan, an internal format audit is carried out with positive results, and then they send the water supply send the request of approval. There is an opinion, a reasoned opinion that is voluntary from the region and autonomous provinces. At the end, the Scientia can give the final outcome on the request that could be not approved, approved under reserve. My last pieces of contribution, I tried to gain to use this chance of sharing experience to provide some concerning issue for Italy. And the last pieces of my contribution is one on our role as Italy in the protocol of water and health, and especially on the task force on increasing resiliency to climate change. And the last part is on the wastewater-based epidemiology and the revision of wastewater directive. As you know, protocol of water and health is really one of the best tool to improve our national systems in the wash sector for many reasons, because it stimulates a partnership into the country, because some targets should be shared among all the stakeholders, and propose to the UN and WHO that are the secretary of this protocol. And also the protocols on water and health provide lots of tools and guidelines, booklets, case studies, workshops focused on not only legislative but also practical criticalities on our systems. One of these group that is led by Italy is on resiliency to climate change. Just in a flash, we analyzed the scenario of climate change in Europe that is producing drought and floods in the same times, together with a trend in increasing temperatures. And this is the trend, the more recent foreseen scenario. So the problem of this new scenario, of these changes, present a wide-ranging impact. There are clearly direct impacts related to this phenomena of increasing of temperature, floods or droughts, but also problems on ecosystems and productive sectors. But there are many other indirect impacts, which doesn't mean less important. So one of most important is the quantity and quality of food. Other problems are migration and conflicts on natural resources and political instability. In water quantity, there are many concerning projections about the water stress, also on the possibility of recharge our aquifers in Europe, and the projection on water quantity are quite concerning about also the access to water. On water quality, we have lots of signals of evidence of effects already in place in Europe, as an example, reduction of dissolved oxygen levels, which means some problems also in bathing area or in wastewater treatment, but also in drinking water production. There are problems of changing in natural ecosystem. So there are lots of evidence that are not only theoretical, but unfortunately already transposed in impacts and research data. The protocol and our area of work is producing lots of options on mitigation and prevention of these effects, both at distal and proximal level. And we shared a couple of case study as an example in Rome to prevent water stress, and it's a success story. But we have not obviously space here to go into details, but we are more than glad to spend another session or a special workshop on climate change. Really, my last 8 minutes of the presentation, I want to try to share you with how the wastewater could be also not only a problem of contamination, but could be also a source of important information. Our report here is the work our colleagues Giuseppina La Rosa and many others young researchers in my section done during the pandemic period on wastewater-based surveillance by detecting the genomic, the specific genomic traces of SARS-CoV-2 in urban wastewater. The work was done in almost 200 sites covering all the national territory. The samples were taken weekly, and also the variants of the viruses were detected on a monthly basis. At the end, we found for all the data analyzed in an area in 1 year of activity, an index RT, that is a direct index of transmission, and at the end of the impact on spreading of the virus into the population, the index are perfectly congruent, are really overlapping, with the advantage of the wastewater treatment index that is really early warning and can detect not only the symptomatic patients but also the asymptomatic. As last example, the approach was really effective in case of detecting the variants. In this slide, you can see the flash survey that were done in 3 successive subsequent weeks from the beginning to the end of December, and you can see the spreading into the regions of the Omicron variant in Italy, and you can see that in 3 weeks this strain took almost all the countries, and as expected, the region that were less affected were the region where the connection and communication were limited. As a result of this work shared with other member states, we proposed, and this article is now on the table, that urban wastewater surveillance is included into the proposal of the revision of directive of urban wastewater treatment, because we see this system is very cheap approach and effective to early detect new or emerging pathogens. So the end of this contribution is that as we proposed into the last New York conference on UN conference on water, it's important to conceive the water as unique in the world, in the same way we are now conceiving health as unique into the planet. And our statement for drinking water is really that partnership and the intersectoral actions should be perceived, because the SDG 6 is, but maybe all the SDG are closely linked to the 17, that is more underestimated SDG, that is partnership for the goals. I thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready for your feedback and reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you so much for this very very rich in information for the presentation. So we have about 10 minutes for some questions. Maybe you can raise your hand. In the meantime, I see that there is one question already in the chat by Dr. Ishtiaq Mondok. So maybe you want to ask your question yourself, or shall we read it? Dr. Ishtiaq Mondok? Okay. Right. So I don't hear anything. So anyone who raised the hand, Livio. Livio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Mr. Lucentini for his great presentation. I liked it a lot.
Thank you.
And can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great.
Thank you. Especially because these words are sweet, so it's more.
Well, indeed, actually, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, my question is about quality control, water quality control. Well, I don't know if the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, the Institute of Healthcare, ever did any cooperation activity, any international cooperation activity with developing countries. I don't know. But the situation in many developing countries, if we take a country, a city, a big city in Africa, in Middle East, you have a situation where there is a big city of 2, 3, 4, 5 million people and absolutely no water system, no sewage, no aqueduct, nothing. What do? They just dig, many people dig private wells, 7, 8 meters underground, they find water, and they live like that. They live with chronic diseases like yellow fever, cholera, any kind of chronic disease, but they live with it. So in this situation, well, to carry out an aqueduct, this is something for builders and would take some 1 billion euros at least. So it's a great work. But let's take apart the aqueduct. The reality is this. Many buildings, many families, they have their own private wells. They take water, they drink that water, which at the entrance of the city is maybe a very good water. But as soon as the water gets inside the city, water gets any kind of pollutants, any kind of microplastics you mentioned. What can we do as a cooperation activity? I mean, from your side, can you figure out any kind of technical assistance?
Yes, okay.
Any solution to put some additives in order to purify water? What can be our role, your role in giving assistance to them? Maybe through a small bio laboratory which can be there in order to take some, samples, random samples. What can we do apart from building up an aqueduct, which is a very strong, very important public work? No? Without an aqueduct, what can we do to help people live with a more healthy water? Any kind of tests, any kind of solution we can give to them? This is my question. Well, consider please that you mentioned, of course, guidelines, you mentioned
Yes.
any kind of planning, but this is a situation of extreme fragmentation, where there are 1 million private wells everywhere. And this is a pretty usual situation in Africa or Middle East. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for this. That is not only a question; it's really a vision. Is together a nightmare and a dream together, because from a scientific point of view, it's really pity to discover that one of the more obvious evidence from the scientific point of view is now so not attended, so not pushed by the countries, because we know that the human development is related to the management of water and sanitation. The older Roman emperor can only was possible because in Rome there was a million of inhabitants, because there was a correct sanitation and drinking water treatment. And the same way for the marine, for the Royal Navy of British, they won lots of wars because they can stay a long time into the ships because they correctly manage the water sanitation. So it's one of the more ancient evidence from the scientific point of view. So it's very sad that this obvious concept is not put into a... So in front of you of this, to cope with this from the human point of view, I can say that after the water, the access to water sanitation is a human right in 2010, I think that personally is a political view, but I think that a contribution from any country to other countries to build aqueducts and build sanitation systems in the medium term or long term should be due. I hope that the whole universal community can really accept a wide universal coverage of this expense, because if we think as one humanity, we should think also as one economy and one support to these essential health drivers. From more realistic and more close point of view, obviously cooperation is as a health institute is a pleasure, is an ethic duty, and is really a passion. Unfortunately, this is not always possible because the burden of institutional roles. We try as a National Institute to stay into European cooperation projects, but not a lot in Africa and in Asia and in other countries. We hope to do it. We work with WHO on it, but more specifically on your problems. Yes, more things lots of things can do. Very simple, because as you know, the problems related to unsafe water are more microbiological and virus problems, more than chemical problems. That could be obviously very concerning, especially in case of lead, arsenic, fluoride in some areas. But in nitrate can be also a problem. But it's in a general point of view, these are long-term effects. The more dramatic problems are from outbreak of pathogens. This kind of problems can be coped by simple disinfections. As an example, UV, that is naturally provided by sun, is really an extraordinary disinfectant. So some simple practices also into bottles put under the sun can really contribute to diminish this problem. So many education problems can be done, and also sometimes in the city, even obviously in the city, we should rely upon public wells that are not really under our controls. But in many household wells, lots of progress can be done by simple education and training, and also strength and knowledge about simple risk on population. And many results are already gained in this direction. But clearly, the solution in a extensive way can only derive from investments that are really driven by human rights. Thank you for your question.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thanks. I would like to hear from Monji Ben Zayed, who is his, the hand raised.
Thank you, Laura. I hope that you listen to me.
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Luca, for this nice and excellent presentation. I'm Monji Ben Zayed, the research engineer from the Arid Region Institute, located in south part of Tunisia and in the dry area with limited soil and water resources. In this area, we use the only resources is the groundwater. We have only the groundwater, and 80% are going to domestic use, and only 20% for agriculture. Here I have just direct question to Luca. In fact, in this region, we have a lot of options to manage this limited resources. We are going in the recharge of the aquifer by recharge well, and we have a project with the University of Sassari, in context of research project with the University of Sassari and University of Barcelona, and we made some recharge well, and we have a good result. But the problem that as we are in dry area and the rain is less than 150 millimeters by year, we have to check for other option. And in the end of the presentation, I see the option of the recharge well, but also the desalinization of seawater, or the recharge with the wastewater. But I think the two last options are very it's still costly. And here my question to Mr. Luca: what is the economical option that can be useful in the dry area for the recharge of the aquifer? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much also for this question. Okay, our experience is that obviously to cope with the droughts, we have not one winning solution, unfortunately. The problem of drought is not new. It was now discovered that some barbaric invasions of the Roman emperor was due to droughts, many years of droughts. As an example, Attila, that was a friend of Roman emperor, moved against because after 3 years the French didn't give him support. So at that time there were lots of solutions such as reservoirs, underground reservoirs that essentially recharge many aquifers, but also collection of rainwater, surface reservoirs. Now many of these options were abandoned because of new systems, but maybe we should think as smart solutions, not only our mobile phones, but also ancient solutions are smart. We can have lots of solutions together. Among the promising solution, recharge of aquifers is one of the best because we can found on natural filtration, on natural processes to have safe water in the underground. On the other hand, to put water underground means that you need energy to put out. So sometimes if it's possible to have also surface reservoirs, you can have a more solution. Also, in case of other water supply system, you should have lots of system connected. As an example, the so-called private wells that are connected in network could support catchments when water lack in some areas. On the other hand, desalination is clearly one of the best solutions because personally I think that for the next generation this could open a new era also for against desertification. But clearly the problem is not water, it's energy in that case, because if we have alternative energies, and we can have as an example desalination plants in the open sea with solar and aeolic and wave energy, we can have a winning solution by controlling also some environmental impact of the brine solutions and discharge. So my answer is that unfortunately we have not one winning solution. We have but fortunately we have many solutions, and sometimes we should use lots of solutions to have the more resilient system.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luca.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we are a little bit, we've taken the time for the questions, so we now maybe break for, well, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we start again. Oh, sorry. I see one more question, but then Aman, and then we just try to be, please try to be brief in the question and the answer so that we have time for the next session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your presentation. In Egypt, we suffer from water insecurity due to many reasons, as you know, climate change, high population growth, and due to the Ethiopian dam. And the government tried to put a water safety plan to establish. But in your opinion, is it better to engage the or involve the non-governmental organizations to in the water management process? It will be, in your opinion, it will be better. And I have another question about the using of agriculture drainage in fish farming. What's your feedback about this process? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Yes, the involvement of NGOs and local population is really really fundamental. Even if sometimes it depends from local circumstances, because sometimes there are some tensions within the communities. So it's better to really have an open discussion at the beginning, and to promote a proactive action, because water safety plan is only a building actions, is not an environment to foster discussion on past problems or tensions of responsibility. Is just a step-by-step improvement of our system. So it should be clear to the beginning of the process that all the contributions are focused on build some progress, not on analyzing on sometimes political fights in a local circumstances. With this clear statement at the beginning, the cooperation with NGOs and the local population is in many cases a success experience. Concerning the impact of fish farming, if I understood well, yes, we have some evidence of lots of problems. Because especially with pharmaceutics, because this kind of farms use lots of antibiotics and also sometimes the growth promoters. Like in any water safety plans, you should investigate at the beginning what are the pressures. So you should discuss with this farm, and possibly by involving them with clear responsibility and due diligence into the WSP process, in order to gain and to share with them all the knowledge, the drugs they use, and in order to have correct monitoring, the communication on any incident and so on, because in that way you can have a better control of this process without without to oppose something to the development of these industries. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Luca, for the answers, and for participants for
Thank you.
raising the interesting questions. I think we can adjust perfectly in time to start right ahead a new presentation by Nicola Colombo. He's from the University of Turin, and he will present about water quality in mountains area under changing cryospheric conditions. So something more on climate change.
Okay, thank you.
Hola, to you. Thank
I'm
you.
going to share my slides. Hopefully you can see them. So do you see them? It's everything okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let's see if I can go ahead. Okay. So thank you, Laura, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. So I'm Nicola Colombo. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Turin in Italy, and I work at the Department of Agricultural, Forest, and Food Sciences. I currently work in the framework of the Italian project PNRR nodes, which I'm going to briefly describe toward the end of my presentation. And my research activities are mainly devoted to the study of water quality and water quality in mountain areas and in cryospheric environments. So my goal with this presentation is to provide a glimpse into the topic of my research. So in a way, I encourage you to interpret my presentation as a kind of review of the current knowledge. So today, I'm going to talk about water quality in mountain areas under changing cryospheric conditions. But first of all, why mountains and water? So mountains are known to be fundamental water sources, and they provide disproportionately high runoff to lowland areas. And as you can see in this figure, from a recently published paper by Viviroli and colleagues, actually we had the presentation from Professor Viviroli yesterday. So we can see that mountain contribution to total catchment discharge is extremely significant in several areas of the world, as you can see from the different hotspots that are highlighted in the blue color. So we can see high contributions in Western United States, in the Central and High Mountain Asia, in the Southern Andes, and South Africa as well, and finally in Europe. And this role of mountains as water sources is often conceptualized into the definition of water towers. And this definition refers to the orographic effect, which often causes higher runoff in mountain areas with respect to lowland areas. And this is due to the extraction of water, so the physical extraction of water from the atmosphere when the air mass is physically forced to lift over the mountain ranges. So, and then we have the redistribution of this water over time. And this can be on a short time scale, for example, snow. And snow represents a seasonal account. We can have medium to long time scales, for example, glaciers. And the water in glaciers can be preserved from years to centuries, roughly speaking. And finally, it can be on a very long time scale. And this is the case of permafrost ice, and the storage can reach ages up to millennia. As I'm going to talk about this also, I'm going to deepen this in the next slides. And regarding climate change, it is fairly known that almost all regions of the world are getting warmer. And it is also quite common to hear that mountain areas are warming even faster to some extent than lowland areas. And this process is known as elevation-dependent warming, and probably potentially you heard this in the past. And in this figure, we see the result of local comparisons of air temperature trends between high and low elevation areas. And in 9 out of 11 cases, high elevation areas show higher temperature trends than low elevation ones. So essentially, they are warming faster. But however, the results of this research performed by Pepin and the colleagues in 2022 shows that when all mountain and lowland studies are put into two groups, there is no systematic difference in warming rates. So let's say, generally speaking, it is right to say that mountain areas are getting warmer, at least as much as lowland areas. And in the number of mountain areas across the globe, temperature trends are even higher than lowland ones. And keeping in mind this knowledge background, we are going to talk about the main cryospheric components that we can find in the mountains and their role as water resources. But before this, we need to introduce the concept of cryosphere, well, which is rather simple. Indeed, the cryosphere refers to the regions of the Earth where water freezes into snow or ice. So essentially where the water is found in a solid form. And the term comes from the Greek word for icy cold, which is krios. And among the features of the cryosphere, we can find ice shelves and icebergs, sea ice, and snow, glaciers, and permafrost. And in this talk, I'm going to focus on 3 specific features, which are snow, glaciers, and permafrost. So the first feature of the cryosphere is snow. And well, it does not need a long introduction, I guess. We all somehow know what snow is. But what is relevant to know is that snow is the largest single component of the cryosphere in terms of area. And on average, snow covers around 46 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface each year. And well, this animation on the right simply shows the variation of global snow cover during the year. And this is like the snow breadth of the Earth. And I think this is pretty effective in giving a visual indication of the relevance of snow as a cryosphere component at the global scale. But the relevance of snow as a cryosphere feature is not just related to its areal distribution, but also to its volume. And based on remote sensing analysis, Livens and colleagues in 2019 estimated the snow volumes for the top 100 snowest mountain regions in the Northern Hemisphere. And this was based on an average estimation of February 2018, which excluded the glaciated areas. So this is an underestimation of the actual volume of stored snow in the mountains. And in this figure, we see some bars, and the higher the bar, the higher the volume of snow stored in each mountain range. And considering all mountain ranges together, we can say that roughly thousands of cubic kilometers of snow seasonally are stored on mountains each year. And our second cryosphere feature is glaciers, and well, specifically mountain glaciers in this case, with their glacier life. And yeah, what do I mean with glacier life? A mountain glacier, like a human being, needs food to grow or maintain its mass. So the glacier food is represented by snow, and the area where the glacier feeds itself, let's say, where snow accumulates and does not completely melt during the melting season, is called accumulation zone. But glaciers can also lose mass through melting and sublimation, for example, and the mass loss occurs in ablation zone. So the larger the relative area of the accumulation zone with respect to the ablation zone, so the more positive is the net annual mass balance. And we can say that, therefore, that the health conditions of the glacier are better, let's say. And finally, our glacier can also move. And this happens through internal deformation and basal sliding. So essentially, the ice flows from higher to lower elevation. And so yeah, glaciers are alive, and I hope this video works and my laptop does not explode. And we can see this is the Glacier Blanc in the European Alps, and this is a video of the movement of the glacier during some months, like 1 year. So we can see these crevasses moving downslope. We can also see the snow accumulating, and shortly we're going to see also the snow melting. And we can see, I stop here, we can see what I said before, the ablation zone, and we can see the snow here where the snow accumulates and doesn't melt during the melt season. And so I can go here, okay. And at the global scale, more than 215,000 glaciers have been mapped. So looking at the volume of ice stored in glaciers, Hock and colleagues collected different estimations of ice volumes in different regions of the globe. And I particularly like this study because showing that by showing the different volume estimates performed by different research, it also shows the uncertainties involved in these estimations. And also please note that in this figure, the ice volume is reported on log scale on the x-axis. And well, we can see a large range of ice volumes for different regions with values, well, roughly ranges from hundreds to tens of thousands cubic kilometers. So the total ice volume stored in glaciers, excluding the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets and periphery, is around 96,000 cubic kilometers. But what is crucial for us to know, beside the absolute value of volume of snow and ice stored in the mountains, it's the contribution of snow and ice melt to runoff. So the actual water that comes into the rivers. And in this study, Hus and colleagues estimated the snow and ice melt contributions to river discharge, to river basins across the globe. So they estimated contributions of around 50% and even more in some large basins of high mountain Asia, as well as in the Andes. But contributions can be also relevant in some basins of the Western United States and also in smaller basins in Europe, where they can reach values higher than 10%. And for instance, in the Po River basins in the northern Italy, which is here, I don't know if you see my pointer, anyway. So here, where I grew up as a kid, snow and ice melt contributions are estimated to be around 20%, which represents a fairly significant hydrological component. And last but not least, our third feature of the cryosphere, which is permafrost. Yeah, permafrost is probably a bit less known with respect to snow and glaciers. And so what's permafrost? Permafrost is defined as lithosphere material, so soil or rock, and included ice, gas, and organic material that remains at or below 0 degrees Celsius for at least 2 consecutive years. So it is just a matter of temperature, and it is essentially it's the thermal state of the subsurface. So this means that permafrost can exist without the relevant presence of ice, but can exist without the presence of ice at all. So, and this is actually a quite common condition for mountain permafrost. And based on the permafrost definition and characteristics, we need to differentiate between thaw and melt. So thaw is when a mixed medium undergoes a partial phase change, in the case of permafrost, for instance, or as in this slide, the case of frozen vegetables, which taken out of the freezer, they keep remaining vegetables, let's say, even after thawing. But differently, melt is when the entire substance changes phase, and this is, for example, the case of for glaciers, and or ice cubes which melt into a glass of water. And this is the thermal profile of the subsurface in permafrost conditions. We have an active layer, which is the surface layer that is seasonally unfrozen, so it thaws during the summer. And at that, we have the ground temperature. So the ground temperature warms in relation with the geothermal gradient until we have no permafrost anymore. And everything else in the middle, this is really simplified explanation, but everything else in the middle is simply frozen. So and this is the body of permafrost, the actual body of permafrost, which is frozen for more than 2 years. And looking at the potential permafrost distribution, it is estimated to underlie between 14 and 16 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface, so Earth's exposed land surface, which means around 11% of the global surface and 15% of the northern hemisphere surface. And in this map, we can see the potential permafrost distribution in northern hemisphere. And even though permafrost is mostly present at high latitudes, it is estimated to be present in most of the mountain areas of the world. And indeed, between 27 and 29% of permafrost is thought to be located in mountain areas, as reported by the IPCC special report on the ocean and cryosphere in changing climate, which was published in 2019. And in this map, we can see how permafrost and glacier characterize cold high mountain regions and how they generally coexist. And in these regions, the estimated area of permafrost distribution is, well, between 14 and 21 times larger than that of glaciers. And this makes permafrost a very relevant cryosphere component in the mountains. And however, differently from glaciers, the volume of ice stored in permafrost is basically unknown. And this is related to the fact that the permafrost, as I said, is a thermal phenomenon that occurs in the subsurface. So it is mostly invisible. And so if we don't have superficial evidence of the permafrost and permafrost ice presence, well, any estimation is pretty complicated. But there are some superficial morphological features that suggest the existence of ice-rich permafrost, and these features are, these landforms are called rock glaciers. And rock glaciers are generally considered as the, well, yes, as the visible expression of long-term creep. Creep in the sense of a very slow movement. So long-term creep of ice rock mixtures under permafrost conditions. And well, they are the most prominent permafrost-related mountain landforms. And so as you can see in the figure, in the images on the left, rock glaciers are characterized by this distinctive surface topography of transversal and longitudinal ridges and furrows. And they also have these typical tongue or lobe-shaped bodies, and they are separated from the surrounding environment by these really steep lateral and frontal scarps and slopes. And rock glaciers, as I said, move downslope really slowly, and in most of the cases, and the velocities range between few centimeters to some meters per year. And looking at the internal ice content of rock glaciers, we can find that massive, massive ice, as shown in the top right figure. But also you can find ice lenses and ice rock mixtures, as we can see in the figure at the bottom on the right. So there is a range of ice content in rock glaciers. And in their study in 2018, Jones and colleagues estimated the existence of more than 51,000 rock glaciers across the globe. And well, they obtained the first approximation of near global rock glacier water volume equivalent, which is around 62 gigatons of water equivalent, and this is globally. And the rock glacier to glacier water volume equivalent ratio is around 1 to 600, excluding the Antarctic and subantarctic and Greenland periphery. And well, it's pretty high on average, but for some mountain regions, the ratio gets lower, like in Central Europe, which is around 1 to 30, or South America, which is around 1 to 150. And we can say that ice content in rock glaciers is, well, is not negligible, at least in some mountain regions. But the question is how cryosphere and its features are changing and may change under the effect of climate change. And we start from snow, and in this study from by Notar Nicola, published in 2020, well, the author quantified the snow cover changes and related phenology in global mountain regions in the period encompassed between 2000 and 2018. And this study reveals that around 78% of the global mountain areas are undergoing a snow decline, and which is characterized by snow cover area decrease up to 13%, as shown in panel A, and a snow cover duration decrease up to 43 days, as shown in panel B. So obviously, this study covers a relatively short time period, which of course limits the attribution of long-term trends. However, it is particularly indicative of the changes that have occurred to mountain snow in the last decades. But these changes are projected to become even more significant in the future, with a really strong implication on runoff from snowmelt. And in the uppermost panel, we can see the share of average runoff from snowmelt in the period 1985-2015. And higher snowmelt runoff ratios are reported in blue tones. And looking at the mountain ranges, higher snowmelt contributions are estimated in the Western United States, Central and High Mountain Asia, Southern Andes, and also in the European Alps region, which is roughly in agreement with the findings of the study by Huss and colleagues that I reported before, that discussed before. And in panels B and C, we can see the impacts of global warming, the estimated impacts of global warming that can induce substantial and progressive decreases in the fraction of runoff originating from snowmelt in many of the same areas. And this is both under warming scenarios of 2 and 4 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial conditions. And similar to snow, global warming has deeply impacted glaciers in the last decades. And as we can see in this map produced by Hugonet and colleagues, which shows mostly negative mass balances for glaciers and all around the globe. And in particular, this study shows during the period 2000-2019, glaciers lost a mass of around 270 gigatons per year, and there was a mass loss acceleration of 48 gigatons per year per decade, and the thinning rates of glaciers outside ice sheet peripheries even doubled over the past 2 decades. So glacier-wide mass balances are increasingly negative, as shown in the figure on the left. And this points to an acceleration trends in the observed development in the last decades. And the conditions of glaciers in the future are projected to become even more critical. And in the figure on the right, we can see the projected glacier mass evolution between 2015 and 2100. And these are relative to each region's glacier mass in 2015. And well, numerically modeled scenarios show that further shrinking of glaciers during the first half of the 21st century is supposed to happen. And depending on climate scenarios, this development will continue during the second half of the century, either in decelerating mode with fast and strong mitigation, or this could lead even to a more or less complete loss of glacier cover in many mountain regions without mitigation. But anyway, we need to consider that a large amount of glacier mass is mass loss during at least the coming decades is inevitable. So it's committed. And this is how these glacier changes look like in real life, let's say. And for instance, in these images, we can see a strong shrinking of the Ameghino Glacier in the Andes from 1945 to 2016, while these images show the great regression of the Muir Glacier and its tributary, the McBride, from 1941 to 2013. So we are in Northern America here. So really a huge loss of mass for glaciers in the last decades. And differently from snow and glaciers, changes in permafrost, in mountain permafrost, cannot be easily documented visually. But as I said, it's not visible. It's a thermal phenomenon. As we can see in both figures, we can document the changes that occur in permafrost by measuring the ground temperatures. And even though the available time series are not very long, warming trends in mountain permafrost have been reported from different areas across the globe. And we can say that permafrost degradation is more or less widespread now across the globe in mountain areas. And well, we actually can see sometimes the visual degradation of permafrost, and this is an image that a figure that shows the degradation of a glacier. Here we are in the European Alps in Switzerland, and we can see from 1975 to 2001, we can see the progressive opening of transverse crevasses. And in 2001, we can see a total collapse of the terminal section. So in this, I hope you see my pointer. So in 2001, we can see a total collapse of the terminal section of the Grove Glacier. And this was likely due to increasing ground temperature and ice melting. And so there was possibly more liquid water circulating in the glacier interior. And yes, even though I have presented, what I have presented so far is not related to water quality in the strict sense, this background can help understanding the impacts of the changing mountain cryosphere on water quality. So what we are gonna do now, it's like it's virtually flying across the globe in order to collect the available information. And the idea is to identify common patterns in the existing studies. And the goal is essentially to distill the insight gained across different cryospheric environments and configurations at the global scale. And well, in order to provide an holistic view of the impacts of cryospheric changes on water quality. And although numerous transport pathways and processes of deposition exist for both natural and anthropogenic contaminants in mountain cryospheric environments, as we can see in this sketch. Here I'm going to focus on the chemical elements derived from natural processes. So in this case, we are talking about geological erosion, and we also I'm gonna have also a focus on the naturally occurring acid rock drainage, which is a specific type of weathering. So I mentioned weathering, and this concept is going to be kind of ubiquitous in the following slides. So it's somehow necessary to introduce it a bit now. And weathering is the in situ disintegration and the composition of rocks and minerals. And this occurs at the Earth's surface, and it occurs because of physical and chemical processes, even though we have also biological processes. And we can have the physical weathering, which is the, it refers to the breakdown of rocks by mechanical stress. And while chemical weathering is the decompositions of rocks due to the chemical reactions. And well, generally speaking, most of the most rocks breakdown involves physical and chemical processes, actually all the processes acting together. So the most important agents of physical weathering are water or ice, temperature, and wind. And as an example, in the top right image, we can see an example of physical weathering, in this case, frost weathering, which is essentially the breakdown of rock through the freezing of water. And then we have the most important agents of chemical weathering, which is still we have water, but in this case we also have oxygen and acids. And among the chemical weathering processes, we can have oxidation and carbonation, for instance, and oxidation involves when we have a reaction with free oxygen. And one example of this type of weathering is the rust formation, which occurs when oxygen reacts with the iron to form iron oxide. And differently, we have carbonation when the carbon oxide reacts with water to form a weak acid, which is called carbonic acid. And this acid can weaken and dissolve rock minerals. So as an example of carbonation, in the figure at the bottom, we can see a carbonate rock with many pits, so these holes in the rock, and they formed by dissolution of the limestone. And so clearly the reactions occurring in the rocks strictly depend on the lithology, and so the minerals composing the rocks. And we also have a specific type of chemical weathering, which is the acid rock drainage. And in many parts of the world, acid rock drainage is a serious environmental problem, and it can have harmful effects on humans, animals, and plants. And why it happens? So acid rock drainage occurs due to oxidation of sulfur-bearing minerals, and for instance, pyrite. And this happens when they are exposed to air, water, and microorganisms. So this process results in the formation of sulfuric acid, and heavy metals can be leached from rocks that come in contact with this acid. And let's say that this process is mostly known because of the environmental issues related to the acid mine drainage. And this is due to it occurs basically when mining activities expose sulfur-bearing minerals. And this can cause the typical rust-colored water, so this red-colored water. And this is due to the precipitation of iron, as shown by the two pictures on the right. And so differently from the acid mine drainage, where the pH of effluents, well, generally ranges between 2 and 4, in naturally occurring acid rock drainage, the pH ranges between 4 and 6. And in most cases, we have aluminium precipitation, and which results in this, well, let's say nice whitish precipitates. And as we can see in this picture at the bottom, and naturally occurring acid rock drainage can be extremely detrimental for water quality in cryospheric environments. And I will show you this later. So after these basic concepts, we can focus on our cryospheric features, and we start from glaciers. So glaciers are phenomenal agents of landscape transformation. And this happens through the physical erosion, as we can see in the animation on the right. And most of the erosion occurs at the glacier bed, and where bedrock comminution and sediment production are unenhanced. And we can see the result of this action on the bed, on the rock, in the two photos at the bottom, and that they were taken in the subglacial drainage system of a glacier on Svalbard in Norway. So thanks to the glacier work, the glacier action, the exposure of fresh rock material with the reactive mineral surfaces is favored. And studies of glacial hydrochemistry have also shown that the importance of sulfide oxidation and carbonate dissolution as a measured solute sources. And this is due to the fact that even a small proportion of sulfide or carbonate present in the rocks can actually dominate the solid production. And warming climate and glacier melting in the last decades have been reported to cause a rise in solid content in 20 remote high elevation lakes in the Sagarmatha National Park in Himalaya. So it's the Everest National Park. And in the figure on the right, we can see how in the early 2010s, which are shown on the y-axis, with respect to the early 1990s, which are shown on the x-axis, we have an increase in electrical conductivity, sulfate, a slight increase in bicarbonate, and an increase also in calcium and magnesium. And particularly sulfate concentrations showed the highest increase in the analyzed period, and the increase was around 57%, while bicarbonate showed a slight increase of 11%. And these increases were even more striking for two lakes which are named LCN9 and LCN10, that the authors of the study investigated more in detail and sampled on an annual basis. So in these two lakes, sulfate showed a fourfold increase, as we can see in panel B, in the figure on the right, and glacier retreat was likely the main factor responsible for this occurrence. And this was probably due to a change in the flow paths and the residence time of the meltwater at the glacier bed. So this led to more favorable conditions for sulfide oxidation. And it is also possible that sediment production and comminution after glacier retreat exposed fresh sulfides and facilitated their oxidation. So in the figure on the right, we also see two main peaks of electrical conductivity and some major ions concentrations in 1998 and 2010. And well, these peaks occur during periods of higher air temperatures. So we can assume that physical erosion and chemical reactions, chemical weathering rates might have increased during warmer atmospheric periods, and possibly also the higher availability of meltwater might have favored the chemical reactions at the glacier bed. And similar evidence was reported for other progrglacial lakes in the European Alps in Italy. And for instance, here, Michela Rogora of the Water Research Institute of the National Research Council in Italy kindly provided this unpublished data, and they show a striking increase in solutes in the progrglacial lake of the Lago delle Locce. And similar to what we observed in Himalaya, sulfate here, which is shown in orange, and calcium, shown in red, and magnesium, shown in green, greatly increased in the last years, and from 1981, 1983 to 2014 and 17. And while bicarbonate, which is shown in blue or violet, I don't see perfectly the color, sorry, remained radar stable. So these chemical changes can be explained by increasing weathering processes and possible weathering of sulfide minerals, which occurred in the recently deglaciated areas, which occurred due to the shrinking of the Locce Glacier. And actually, the Locce Glacier had a very strong decrease and lost a lot of mass from 1979 to 2013 and 2017. So we can see how this huge recession of the glacier also caused the increase in solute content in the water. But if we move now into the permafrost environment of the Yukon River Basin in North America, which actually has experienced a warming climate over the last 3 decades, and that has led to permafrost degradation, we see that similar to what observed before for glaciers, for transitional glaciated environments, we see great increases in surface water chemical fluxes, and this happened for some major ions like calcium, magnesium, sulfate, and sodium. And the authors of this study suggested that expanding active layer, increased weathering, and sulfide oxidation coupled to carbonate dissolution were responsible for these positive trends. And we know that increasing active layer thickness can expose newly thawed soils and rocks to near surface water. And so we can have an increase in the chemical fluxes from freshly exposed substrata, so that the substrata that were frozen before, and they are not frozen anymore because of climate change. And permafrost thaw and degradation can also lead to new hydrological pathways, and we can have an enhanced interaction between mineralized groundwater and surface water that before were not. It was not possible for this water to reach the surface water, so the river water. And in another permafrost environment, in this case we are in the United States, in Colorado, we kind of see the similar pattern. So we see trends, an increase in sulfate, as we can see in the figure on the right, on the top. And these trends we reported between the 1918 and 2010. But interestingly, in this case, we also see in the figure on the bottom, on the left, we can see increasing trends in discharge during the period September and October. And this is the period of the season when we don't have snow melt anymore because snow melt is depleted. And also the author found that there were no positive precipitation trends in this period. So this increase in discharge and sulfates, especially in September and October, can be attributed to increasing groundwater contributions after permafrost degradation. And there's also there can be a little bit of ground ice melting. And so we have an enhanced weathering of freshly exposed mineral surfaces. And again, these are the main actors responsible for this increasing trends in sulfate, for instance. And beside the permafrost, we also have rock glaciers and rock glaciers thawing. And rock glaciers thawing, like glaciers melting and permafrost degradation, can influence the water quality in mountain environments. And here we can see, for example, the results of the study from Williams and colleagues in Colorado in the United States. In the figure at the bottom, on the left, we see the seasonal trends of magnesium, calcium, and sulfates. And we can see the seasonal trends, and particularly we can see the difference between the rock glacier trends in these ions and other reference surface waters. So we can see the huge difference between the rock glaciers and the reference waters. And especially this striking difference occurs toward the end of the summer season, when again snow melt is depleted, so we don't have a relevant contribution from snow melt, and we have probably more contribution from groundwater and ice melt from the interior of the rock glacier. And rock glaciers are also known to have concentrated mechanism, and this is commonly attributed to the enhanced water rock contact in the rock glacier interior, because we have a large amount of fine-grained sediments in the rock glacier, and with conditions that, well, somehow are similar they are similar with respect to the glacier bed that we saw before, so with a lot of fine-grained sediments. And in these two pictures, we see on the right, we see the coarse debris cover at the surface of the rock glacier, but also we can see the presence of fine-grained sediments in the subsurface. And additionally, the downslope movement of the rock glacier can also favor the production of fresh mineral surfaces, which are then available for chemical reactions. And this is a very interesting study because it's the only existing study that presents the chemical stratigraphy of an entire glacier ice core. And this specific rock glacier is located in the Central European Alps, and the authors of this study dated the ice core of the rock glacier to about 10,000 years. And what we can see here is that the ice core has layers of extremely high solid content, such as sulfate, and also a very low pH with minimum values around 4. And we also have very high levels of heavy metals like nickel. And if we look at the drinking water limits of the European Union, as we can see at the top of the figure on the right, well, we can also see that in several core layers, these limits are exceeded. So, and actually the waters outflowing from these rock glaciers cannot be used for drinking. And similar to what observed in glacial and permafrost settings, also the surface waters influenced by and fed by rock glaciers have started to show strong chemical modifications. in the last decades. And here we are in 2 lakes located in the European Alps. And what we can see, it's like strong increases in electrical conductivity. And again, sulfate, calcium, and magnesium, so the major ions. And for those, who wonder if the chemical characteristics of precipitation could have had a role in this process, well, the answer is no, because in the figure on the left at the bottom, we can see that the mean concentrations of ions in the atmospheric deposition, which was collected close to the lakes, actually decreased in the last decades. And so essentially, it shows an opposite trend with respect to the trends measured in the lakes. So it's not precipitation, it's the glacier effect that influences the surface water characteristics. And so talking about the acid rock drainage, changes in permafrost and glacier ice and ice-rich permafrost can greatly affect the natural occurring acid rock drainage. And in areas where the frozen material or the ice have been providing like a sort of cover that prevented before the degradation, so before melting, before degradation, this cover prevented the oxidation of sulfide minerals. But after the degradation, we can have the acid rock drainage development, as we have some examples here. On the left, we have the first example coming from the Pyrenees in the Western Europe. This regards some creeks and streams in high mountain catchments. And permafrost and rock glaciers in these catchments have been indicated as one possible cause of acid rock drainage. And we can see these whitish aluminum precipitates that cover the stones in the creeks and the streams. And these precipitates usually occur where the acidic waters, which are highly enriched in metals due to the acid rock drainage related to the oxidation of sulfides. When this where this acidic water, they mix with non-acidic waters, and then we have these precipitates. And on the right, we see a similar pattern. We see whitish precipitates in a stream fed by a rock glacier in the European Alps, in Austria. And in this case, the acidic waters originating from the rock glacier mixed with the non-acidic waters of a stream, and this caused the stones in the stream to coat with these whitish precipitates. And in both areas, so both Pyrenees and European Alps, the waters affected by the acid rock drainage showed concentrations of potentially toxic trace metals, such as aluminium, nickel, zinc, and so on, which, they largely exceeded the quality standards for aquatic ecosystems and drinking water laws. So in this case, it is also important to highlight the fact that acid rock drainage is also is not purely abiotic, but it's often biologically mediated, which can speed up the rate of reaction. So therefore, if we have an increasing night temperature, this could result in an acceleration of sulfide biochemical oxidation. And this is due to its positive correlation with temperature. So we can hypothesize that with global warming, the area where acid rock drainage can occur will progressively move outslope. And to further show the effect of acid rock drainage on the quality of high elevation waters, and the dependence of this process on the elevation, we move to Italy, always in the European Alps, where 3 lakes with rock glaciers in the catchments were investigated by some colleagues in Austria, so by Ilyashuk and colleagues. And these lakes and their glaciers are located along an elevational gradient with decreasing air temperatures from left to right in the table. And at increasing elevations and increasing air temperatures, we see increasing increasingly high pH values and decreasing concentration of solids. So essentially, the higher we go, the lower the solute content. And in several cases, as we can see in the tables on the right, for sulfates, aluminium, manganese, nickel, and pH, these values exceeded again the quality standards for aquatic ecosystems and drinking water laws. And this elevational gradient of solid concentrations might depend on the fact that at higher elevations, permafrost degradation and ice melting are still not predominant. So the climate change still has to have a relevant effect at the highest elevations. And while at lower elevation, these processes might be already occurring and might be relevant. And in addition, at lower elevation, we can have water that could also remain in the liquid state for longer periods of time. And so in these conditions, so around 2,700 meters above sea level in this area, we can have the conditions are good for the acid drainage to occur. And let's say that further investigation in the future might give us some additional insight into the possible expansion of acid rock drainage to higher elevations. And looking at permafrost, the long-term monitoring of the upper Snake River in Colorado in the United States showed the same pattern. So increasing trend is in zinc, manganese, calcium, and sulfate concentrations that continuously increased since the 1970s. And interesting, in this catchment, there was no glacier or glacier. So in this case, the degradation of permafrost that could have resulted in the distributing opening of new subsurface flow pathways. And also ice melting in soil pores and rock fractures might have allowed the migration of groundwater and oxygen into the subsurface. So where previously they could not penetrate. And if we go so we essentially close our journey across the globe in South America, in Peru, and specifically in the Pastoruri Glacier area. And the Pastoruri Glacier has lost around 50% of its surface between 1957 and 2010. And here, the exposure of fresh sulfide-rich rock outcrops to air and water due to the retreating glacier. And well, this produced an oxidation of disposed sulfide minerals, such as pyrite, and this resulted in a very evident acid rock drainage. And as seen in the previous areas with permafrost and rock glaciers, low pH values and high concentrations of heavy metals characterize these waters in the proglacial area. And well, actually, even lower pH values were found in the water of this area, and with respect to the previous ones, because pH here was even around 3, which corresponds to very high electrical conductivity values. And in these pictures, we can actually see the results of the acid rock drainage with this reddish color, and this is due to the iron precipitation. So really similar to the acid mine drainage, let's say, even if this case is completely natural. And okay, so like now a little summary, an outlook. So let's say in the last decades, mountain glacier shrinkage, permafrost thaw, and degradation and snow cover reduction have increased. And this is often resulted in increased mineral weathering and acid rock drainage in recently deglaciated and thawed zones. And we also had an enhanced export of solutes, including heavy metals, from ice melting in rock glaciers. But also less snow means less dilution of the cryospheric solute-rich flows. And this, let's call it maximum cryospheric effect, which occurs during the late summer and early autumn. It's also when the hydrological buffer of the cryosphere is needed the most, so the impacts are going to be even more relevant. And so yes, so all these processes together can lead to complex and mostly largely unknown impacts on ecosystems, and climate change is expected to further accelerate and exacerbate these processes and related impacts. And what is needed? So to face these issues, we absolutely improved conceptual and mechanistic understanding, together with a quantitative diagnosis of the involved mechanism, while we should also switch from, let's call it, academic timeframes, 1 to 5 years in general, to long-term monitoring programs, which can be more than 5 years. And this is in order to have enough statistical power to actually assess the temporal changes. We should get an integrated, possibly global view of the rapidly changing mountain environments. And this can happen, can be performed through interdisciplinary collaborations and international cooperations, and potentially based on improved observational networks. And in order to develop suitable management strategies and adapt to these fast-changing cryospheric conditions, we should engage stakeholders for translating and transferring this scientific knowledge, also taking into account their contributions. And finally, we should also think about the co-development and shared governance with the participation of local communities in our monitoring research programs, because these people are going to use this water. So it is fundamental. And it's, let's say, in order to face these water challenges and other water challenges in the northwest of Italy, the PNRR Notes project was launched at the end of 2022. And so this project is called the Digital and Sustainable Northwest. It is a project selected as a part of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which was founded by the Italian Ministry of University and Research. And the main objective of the project is to support the sustainable and inclusive growth of the territories in northwestern Italy, and through the double transition, digital and ecological. And specifically, the spoke 4, the spoke in which I work, which is called the Digital Innovation Toward Sustainable Mountain, has 5 main objectives, which are, the first one is to promote the efficiency of ecosystems and management of water resources and energy, and foster the development of innovative sensors for hydrometeorological variables, encourage the research on data transmission tools for monitoring water resources and energy. And we have, the goal is to promote the optimal management and representation of big data. And finally, the goal is the fifth objective is to produce digital and modeling tools for the integrated management of water sources and energy. So considering the current and forthcoming water challenges for our mountains and for the mountains across the globe, well, this project for us, it represents a great opportunity for the sustainable and inclusive growth of mountain territories in the northwest of Italy. And so, yeah, I can say that this is a very exciting challenge, and it's exciting to be part of this effort. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nicola. This was really a very interesting, very, very interesting and, a rich science-based presentation. Let's see if we have some questions from the participants. Yes, I see Hugo has his hand raised. Hugo, you have the floor. Yes. Hugo Mantia, you're there? Okay.
So I know that Hugo had some problems with the mic a few days ago. So now I don't know if it works. No, it's Nicola here. I don't know if maybe Hugo has still the same problem.
Okay, maybe in the meantime, we can give the floor to Tefera Arega. He's also his hand raised. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the presenter for very nice presentation. It was very interesting, really.
Thank you.
My question is, we saw that holistic global conclusions. For example, in Ethiopia, I was in a meeting that shows that a presentation, especially on the rainfall presentation, in some parts of Ethiopia, due to climate change, impacts the parts of the country that have high rain may get low rain due to the climate impacts. And some parts of the country also, an area which have lower amount of rain may get a large amount of rain, and such type of difference even in temperature also presented in that presentation. So that when you put a holistic presentation for the globe, don't you think that it will have a misleading effect for the reader or for the people or for the experts? But in general, the presentation was very nice. Thank you very much.
Yes, I absolutely agree. The main problem is that, as I also said in the one of the last slides, what we need to do is that we, at the moment, the knowledge about not only climate, but especially the water quality in mountain areas is very scattered across the globe. So what I mean for an holistic view, it's also based on the current knowledge of these processes. So to actually reach and achieve the goal of having a holistic view, we absolutely need to increase the observations across the globe. And of course, my presentation, and in general, this kind of presentation can be considered even biased by the fact that there are, of course, studies focused on some mountain areas. So of course, I absolutely I get this advice, and then I think it should be improved. But also to improve this, we need more observations, more knowledge, which it's increasing for let's say glaciers and snow across the globe. But even if we forget about chemistry and water quality and just we talk about permafrost in the mountains, well, permafrost in the mountains is not very known. It's not very studied. It's a really new science. And I would say that most of the papers about permafrost have been published in the last 15 to 20 years. And before that, permafrost was studied like, well, not only in a qualitative way, but we actually used, they are called the rule of thumbs. So basically, to know where permafrost is, there was like this rule of thumb, so something very, very rough. And but I understand the issue, and I think, yeah, we need to improve this based on improved observational networks, as I said.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I see Hans. Hans has a question. Please.
Nicholas, excellent presentation. Have you considered using limestone to remediate some of these acid mine drainages in the higher elevations when the rivers are very small? And what we're talking about is not liming these rivers, but putting pebble-size limestone in it so that constantly some of the limestone will neutralize the acid rain.
Well, I'm not an expert on this specific topic on how to solve this problem, but I read something about, and at the moment, I think it could be a good idea. The main problem with this is that if we think about acid mine drainage, there is an hotspot, which is the mine, but in the case of permafrost, for instance, we have a distributed effect. So probably the challenge is actually to select the areas where to work to try solving this problem. So, but I think it should be studied. It should be, the knowledge about this should be improved, because this is getting it's getting widespread actually. And then actually I wanted to put a new study in this presentation, but unfortunately I'm reviewing this study and it was not published. It's not published yet, and I'm reviewing it. And it was nice because it showed different areas in the European Alps with this problem, so the acid rock drainage, and actually these stones were found by people going to the mountains, and they called the university and they said, hey, I know that you're studying this because I know I have some contacts, so listen to me, I found this kind of stones in different places. And so they published a paper on this. It's kind of citizen science, but yeah, it was based on the inputs coming from people going to the mountains. But we need this. Since the acid rock drainage is something visual that we can see, it would be nice to actually couple this with the citizen science. So a picture with the cell phone, smartphone is perfectly fine, and if we can somehow get the coordinates, we can improve the knowledge on the distribution of this process, and also on how to solve it if we need to do it.
Thank you.
And sorry, what I forgot to say is that in the catchment, usually when we don't have carbonates, this effect can be enhanced. But even if we have a small amount of carbonates, usually this effect, it's not so impacting. So it's also important to know the lithological condition of the catchments. And this is something that we are trying to do with in a study that we are working on it now with rock glaciers. But we see where we have a small amount of carbonates, usually this process is not so relevant. So it's also important to know the lithological background.
Okay, thank you. I see Hugo now. Hugo is at least on the video. Do you want to ask your question?
Hugo?
Hi,
Yes.
Hugo.
Yeah, Hugo, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you, Nicola, for the great presentation. One question. In South America, it's a pretty diverse area, you know, the Andes. The vegetation plays an important role in the water cycle. So have you guys studied the participation of different vegetation covers in the physical process of accumulating or retreatment of these glaciers?
No. And in general, from my perspective, I have to say I'm not a huge expert in vegetation, because the places where I work, usually they don't have so much vegetation. So somehow it's an issue that I don't consider so much. Well, it depends on the role of vegetation, but let's say that these processes usually, well, which kind of vegetation you mean? Because it's important to understand.
Yeah, but I'm meaning the vegetation that is below the glaciers, of course. So I mean, in terms of the Andes, we have two types of main vegetation. One is kind of upland savannas called the páramos, which are very important in accumulating the water, and the other is the mountain cloud forest, and both of them, so they participate, as the name implies, the cloud forest in the water process. So whatever the water comes into the glaciers, it comes from down, at least in some proportion, and it comes from a biological process, which is the participation of the vegetation in terms of the water cycle, you know?
Well, I cannot give an answer specific on this because I'm not an expert. What I know in the Andes is, for example, this let's say they call it the issues about the rock glaciers and the rare water quality is very important from what I know with the collaborators where we have. So I don't know, like Valecitos. No, I don't know if you know the place. Hugo is vanished now, but yeah. Okay, and El Gigante, also a rock glacier. So there, I know there are several problems, but unfortunately, I cannot give you an answer specific on vegetation because I have no specific knowledge on this, and specifically in the Andes. So I cannot.
But thank you. But maybe that's the call, that
Yeah,
The
exactly.
glaciers are part of a very dynamic system, and you guys that are in charge of generating this platform, this informatic platform, it would be very interesting to incorporate the data and the knowledge that people from that is working in other belts of this altitudinal gradient are collecting. We have something that actually has been promoted by the Mountain Partnership, that is the Red Gloria, which is a platform in which we have information about the vegetation cover, and particularly the forest in the Andes. And right now, for example, we are facing processes like deforestation. It's a huge, and it for sure has an impact on the data that you guys are collecting around the world.
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely. This is gonna be super interesting to add this to the view, let's say, the concept. So thank you.
I still see Tefera's hands, but it's still from the question before, right? Because we are almost at the closing.
Yes.
So I don't see any other questions. Oh, Amal, quickly before we close. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering about communities, how they can use the glacier water and snow water in combination with other water sources like wetlands or groundwater. Is it easy thing or what? Thank you.
Well, if it's easy or not, it's not easy to say. What I know from some recently published paper, and also from talking to people living in the mountains, is that some springs that were used from shepherds and farmers and mountain huts people, so people living in the mountain huts, so for drinking purposes and for other purposes, they actually needed to move. So they stopped. They had to stop collecting some waters because the water quality was not good, so it was exceeded in drinking water laws limits in the European Union. And also there is another issue, that is the more the glaciers retreat, the more people try to go higher in elevation to get the water. And this is actually happening in some places in Himalaya, where rock glaciers and some lakes on the rock glaciers, they are called thermokarst lakes, have been used as a water source. But the problem that, again, we know that they are using this water for drinking purposes or for animals and agriculture, but we don't know the quality of this water. And as we said, we have some indications that the rock glacier water can be, let's say, problematic. And so, so yeah, absolutely, it's necessary to understand more also how to use this water and how the shift in the water sources is happening. But also, this is not common knowledge. Usually when you read the paper, a scientific paper, you always see the scientific results, and the last sentence of the paper is, well, it will be fundamental and crucial to use this knowledge to improve the water management of this source of these waters. And then you try to find a paper about water management of high elevation waters, and you find nothing, usually when it's about mountains. So there is a big lack of knowledge between the physical knowledge, let's say, the physical geography, and the human geography. And so let's say your question is, yeah, this question goes to me, but to be honest, it goes to probably the entire physical geography community. And not only.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, so I think we have arrived at the time to close. Just to thank again both the presenters and the participants for for the excellent presentations that they've added to this now 3 days, and for some very interesting discussions. I have a very quick announcement regarding tomorrow program. I think, it was always there to confirm, but I think there is just a little change in the order of the presentation tomorrow. So there will be the tomorrow 11. So the first one will be on integrating risk management into water infrastructure, and the second one will be on climate change, water, forestry, and agroforestry. Is that yes? All right. Okay, so we can close this today here and see you all tomorrow. And more of you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.